بعد نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اقتفى أثره واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. Inshallah, we'll continue with reading from the book known as the Musannaf of Abu Bakr Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Shayba rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 235 after the Hijrah. And last time we spoke about the chapter regarding a person who steps on a place that is filthy, and then he steps after that on a place that is clean or cleaner than the place that he stepped on before. What is necessary upon such a person? Does he have to wash the location that does he have to wash his foot or his sandal or his shoe that stepped on such a filthy location? Does he have to make a wudu? Or is it sufficient to just walk on something clean after walking on something filthy? And we talked about the transmission of religious impurity or najasa by way of moisture and how the ground can purify it thereafter, i.e. that which is filthy, if walking on clean ground afterwards, then that can serve as a means of purification. And last week we meant to add the chapter that the author brings after that. It only contains 3 narrations. We would have been better suited to add it to last week's lesson. And it is the chapter where the author, he says, "Man qala idha kanat jaffa fahuwa zakatuha." This chapter regarding whoever says, if the ground is dry, then it will purify, i.e. that which you stepped in from najasa. So if you stepped in najasa, we mentioned that from the scholars are those that said that the ground purifies it, purifies whatever you stepped on. And we mentioned that from them are those that say if what you stepped on was dry, then you don't need to wash it. While some of them said no, if what you stepped on was moist or dry, then the ground afterwards can purify it. And so there's a difference of opinion there. Is if what you step in is dry, then the view from last week of the majority was that you did not have to wash it. But if what you stepped on was moist, i.e. it had liquid, it had rutuba, moisture that could transmit the impurity, then you needed to wash your foot, your sandal, your shoe, etc. Now the question is, and that's even if you walked on land after that. But here the author is bringing a chapter about those that say, no, even if what you stepped in was moist, if it had moisture where it could transmit the impurity, then just by simply stepping on dry ground afterwards, then that will purify whatever you stepped in. So you don't need to wash your shoe, your sandal, even if you step in fresh dog excrement, for example, and the najasa has now stuck to your shoe and clung to your shoe and been transmitted, by simply walking on dry ground afterwards, then that is a purification of your shoe. So as of right now, we have 3 opinions. We have 3 views. The first of them is, and we'll use dog excrement for the example. The first of them is that you step in dry dog excrement. Then here we say you don't have to do anything because that will crumble, it will break away, and it will not transmit to your foot, your shoe, your sandal, and therefore there will be no najasa on them, and so they don't need to be washed. Then we have the second view that if you step in moist, fresh dog excrement, for example, then that moisture will allow the najasa to transmit. And so it will cling to your foot, your shoe, your sandal, and now that location must be washed. And it's not sufficient to just walk somewhere else afterwards, where that will just smudge it in and smear it in and spread it around. It's necessary that it be washed. That is one opinion. But the author is now bringing a chapter which is a contrary opinion that no, if you step on dry ground after that, then the dry ground can serve as a medium to remove the najasa without there being a necessity to wash it. And obviously this is, of course, if the ground itself actually removes all of the traces of the najasa. So let's see what the author brings in this chapter. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, but before that, the Sheikh Asad al-Shithri, hafidhahullah ta'ala, he says about this topic, He says, قال الشافعي وأحمد لا تطهر الأرض النجسة إلا بالماء. I've made a mistake. So the positions that we mentioned are still valid positions in the disagreement. That is not what the mistake is in. The mistake is in what is the topic of this chapter. The topic of this chapter is if najasa affects the ground, if somebody urinates on the ground, or there is a spill of blood, period blood on the ground, and that now that location is dirty. That location is dirty. Does that location simply drying serve as a purification of that location, or does that location need to be washed? So as far as the original positions, the original topics that we mentioned, they were all covered in last week's lesson, and they were the opinions that we mentioned. But as far as this topic, then I made a mistake. This topic is regarding if a location is filthified by religious impurities, by najasa. Does that location become pure by simply drying up, or is it necessary that that location be washed? For example, before you pray in said area. And this still connects to the previous conversation, the justification of, does najasa require water to be removed, or can it be removed by any medium? And we know that from them are those that say najasa can be removed by any medium. Whatever gets rid of it has gotten rid of it. While others, they hold the view that najasa can only be removed by water. And so this is the topic. If there is najasa on a surface or an area, does that area of the ground become pure simply by drying up? So if last week was about our foot, our sandal, our shoe stepping in a najis area, then this is about the area itself. Does it become dry does it become pure by simply drying up? الشثري حفظه الله تعالى, he says that قال الشافعي وأحمد لا تطهر الأرض النجسة إلا بالماء، وقال أبو حنيفة تطهر بالشمس والريح إذا ذهب أثر النجاسة. الشثري, he says that الشافعي as well as Imam Ahmed, the two of them, they say that the ground does not become pure. Najis ground does not become pure except via water. Meaning the ground will not become clean unless you use water to clean it. While Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, he says that the ground can become clean via the sun, i.e. evaporation and drying up, as well as the wind, erosion, and moving the najasa away, as long as the actual item or the essence of the najasa is removed. So if the sun evaporates it and dries it up until it has no more presence, or if the wind erodes it and pushes it away until it has no more presence, then this is sufficient in the view of Abu Hanifa. While Ahmed and the Shafi'i, the two of them say, no, it is necessary that it be removed by water. And their argument, for all intents and purposes, it stems from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when that Arab man came and urinated in the masjid. When that Arab individual, that non-city desert dwelling Arab, came and urinated in the masjid, and the Sahaba were ready to pounce on him for his action. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said to them, Da'u, leave him be until he finishes. And then when he finished, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam commanded that a container of water be brought and poured on where that man urinated. And then he educated the man that the masajid are not suitable for these type of actions. And this is because the masjid during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was not carpeted. It was just ground, rocks that had been flattened, dirt that had been smoothed over. And so a person who was not from the city, not civilized, quote unquote, they find an open place, a corner to urinate in, they do so. And they didn't understand the nature and the value and the superiority of the masjid. So this individual, new in his Islam and ignorant to the rules, urinated in the corner of the masjid. And so the Prophet ﷺ, instead of reprimanding him or scolding him or allowing the Sahaba to pounce on him and make the situation worse for the individual who was urinating and for the Sahaba who would pounce on them, as well as for the reputation of Islam, the Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba to leave the individual be, as this would be more containing to the contamination that the individual was causing. And then when the individual finished, the Prophet ﷺ, he commanded that a container of water be brought and poured over that man's urine to wash it away. And so this is a proof, they say, and they here being the Shafi'iyya and the Hanabila, that the location has to be cleaned off by water. The Prophet ﷺ did not request any other substance or any other medium to be used to wash off that filth. And so they say this shows that only water can be used. While the contrary opinion would say just because the Prophet ﷺ used water, it doesn't necessitate that only water can be used. Yes, water can be used. And yes, water is the most effective, but it does not negate the effectiveness of something else or the usefulness of something else or the permissibility to use something else. And the reality of the matter is that temporary najasa, i.e. a pure surface that has become contaminated, once the contamination or once the contaminant is removed, then the surface goes back to being judged in its original state. And so whatever can remove the contaminant, whether it be water, wind, sun, hand sanitizer, alcohol, wiping, scrubbing, whatever removes the contaminant, then they remove along with it the determination that the area is contaminated. And like this is the argument that is made by the Ahnaf and those who support their view in this issue. And perhaps their issue is, or their view is the stronger of the two. But let us continue to see what Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba mentions in this topic. He says, "Man qala idha kanat jaffa fahuwa zakatuha." Those who say that if the land is dry, then it is its purification. Those who say that if the land dries up, if the ground dries up, then that is how it is cleaned. Abu Bakr, he says, حدثنا عبد الرحمن بن مهدي عن الحارث بن عمير عن أيوب عن أبي قلابة أنه قال إذا جفت الأرض فقد زكت. Abu Bakr, he says that Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, he narrated to us on the authority of Al-Harith ibn Umayr, on the authority of Ayyub, on the authority of Abi Qilaba, who said that if the ground dries, then it becomes pure. If the ground dries, then the surface becomes clean. It becomes pure. Abu Bakr, he says, حدثنا عبد الله بن نمير عن إسماعيل الأرزق عن ابن الحنيفية أنه قال إذا جفت الأرض فقد زكت. He says that Abdullah ibn Numair narrated to us on the authority of Ismail al-Azraq, on the authority of Ismail al-Azraq, on the authority of Ibn al-Hanifiyya, who said that if the ground dries up, then it becomes pure. And he says, حدثنا مرحوم بن عبد العزيز عن أبيه أنه قال رأيت الحسن جالسا على أثر بول جاف فقلت له فقال إنه جاف. Abu Bakr, he says that Marhum ibn Abdul Aziz narrated to us on the authority of his father, who said, I saw Al-Hasan, yani Hasan al-Basri, sitting on top of an area that had the traces of dried up urine on it. And so I said something to him about it. And he said, it's dry. Meaning, Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah ta'ala, was sitting on a location where somebody had previously urinated. And that urination had dried out, but the stain was still there. You could still tell that the urine was previously at that location, or somebody had urinated at said location. And this is extremely relevant for those of us who are like truck drivers and at the truck stops and things like this. We see this often where the ground is full of those stains and those marks, and it has that odor where you can tell people have been urinating here. But that being the case, or somebody going to school in the subway system, on the steps and underneath the steps and on the platform, right? And the bus stops. These are things where you can tell somebody urinated there, and you might even see the stain on the ground, but the location is dry. Hassan al-Basri, he was sitting on a location like this. And we all know that it is impermissible to intentionally filthify oneself with najasa. And no person would sit in an impure place and contaminate themselves willingly. And so Hassan al-Basri is sitting in this location that urination had occurred in. And so this individual, the father of Marhum, Abdul Aziz, he said something to Hassan al-Basri about it. Right? How can you sit in such a place? Why are you sitting here? Right? Why not sit somewhere else? Why not move off of this area? To which Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah ta'ala, he just replied, it's dry. Meaning there's no harm in this circumstance for me sitting here because the area is dry. So the najasa has been considered to be clean, and it is no longer an impure surface. And this becomes relevant because can a person pray at such a location? Right? And we're not talking about should a person pray at such a location, or do they have to pray at such a location? Right? If you can find a place that's cleaner, then find a place that's cleaner. But if a person were to pray at this location, then according to Hassan al-Basri and Abi Qilaba and Ibn al-Hanafiyyah, all of them said that this location is clean enough to pray in. And that's an important point, right? A lot of times when traveling, for example, and at the, not even the truck stops, but at the normal car rest stops, you might see stains on the ground, and you don't want to pray in the grass because it's, you know, moist or it will stain your clothes, and you want to pray in the parking lot area where it's dry. But you don't know what's happened. Has a dog walked there? Has an animal urinated there? But as long as the ground is dry, then it is considered to be clean. So that is that chapter. As I said, we should have attached it to last week's chapter, even if it is a different topic. But just due to its brevity, it would have been appropriate to attach it to last week's topic. That being the case, the next topic is one that has length. And so, the time does not allow us to engage it today. And it is the chapter regarding drinking milk and those who say an individual needs to make wudu because of that. And likewise, those who say that no wudu needs to be made because of that, but only rinsing out of the mouth. This is a topic where there is disagreement from amongst the scholars of the past. If somebody drunk milk, do they have to make wudu? Or do they just have to rinse out their mouth? Or is those preferable actions, etc.? And so we'll talk about that and the statements of the Salaf regarding that conversation next time with Allah's permission. And we'll stop at this amount. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.